And we are back online for the second part of the presentation. I'm really happy to welcome Gerry McGovern today. I'll give a quick word of introduction. The Irish Times has described Gerry as one of the five only visionaries who have had a major impact on the development of the web. Maybe you already saw him on BBC, CNN, CNBC, on television, or in several radio shows, or maybe you read about him in printed media. Gerry is the co-founder and CEO of Customer Carewords, a consultancy company that has developed a set of tools and methods to help large organizations identify and optimize the customer's top online tasks. So to do this, he has created the Top Tasks framework, about which he regularly holds conferences, and he also wrote several books, so don't hesitate to have a look at all that. He's got several very large commercial clients like Microsoft, Cisco, NetApp, VMware, IBM. He also consults regularly for the different governments like US, UK, Dutch, Canadian, etc., and of course Irish. And you have written 8 books, Gerry. Your latest book is called Worldwide Waste. How digital is killing the planet and what to do about it. So unfortunately, I know full well that we are creating more data by streaming our conference today. It's always a tough choice to make when we want to increase the awareness about the impact of IT, but I'll give you the floor to talk to us today about the explosion of data, what we can do to try to reduce it.
Thank you, Olivier. Thank you very much for your kind introduction there. So I used to be a big fan of Wired magazine, and I've been involved in the web industry since close to the beginning, maybe 93, 94 sort of territory. So when this came out back in 1997, this particular article, I believe that, we're facing 25 years of prosperity, freedom, and a better environment for the whole world. You got a problem with that. Classical Silicon Valley techno-optimism. Well, it hasn't panned out exactly how we thought it would, has it, in so many different ways. It's not just the climate crisis, it's the whole economy, the slave economy of gig workers that Uber, etc., has created. And of course, not to be outdone, we're still saying, the techies are still saying, half of the emission cuts will come from future tech. We just haven't invented it yet. Well, we have the solutions already to the climate crisis, and the technology is called legs, walking, and bicycles. If we got on our bike a lot more and less in the electric car, we do a hell of a lot more for the world than trying to gadgetize the solution. Gadgets, too many gadgets are actually killing the planet, and more of them will certainly not save it. So this is a comic strip or a cartoon I saw recently, gross domestic product, efficiency, utility, expediency. Basically, we're consuming the earth. Well, this was in 1969. We've known about these problems for a long time, but as humans, we're wonderful at ignoring things. They say the human is not a rational animal, the human is a rationalizing animal. And we basically rationalize the situation where we have the comfort to consume and create massive quantities of waste. So whatever CO2, whatever we are extracting from the earth at a speed and a momentum that is simply unsustainable. We are taking too much stuff, we are taking too much materials out of our planet, as I'm sure lots of you know. So raw material use to double by 2060. Electric vehicles require 4 times the minerals of traditional vehicles. So while electric vehicles are better over a lifespan than traditional cars, as people know, the actual creation process is very, very intense from a materials point of view. And annual energy use, absolutely exploding. We don't have an energy production problem. We have an energy consumption problem. We consume far too much of everything. That's our basic problem, right? The CO2 caused by humans, up until 1919, about 5%. of all the CO2 that we have been responsible for, by 1919, we had created about 5% of that. By 1975, about 25%. Between 1975 and 1995, another 25%. And between 1995 and 2020, 50%. So all the horrible stuff we are doing to this planet, we did half of it in the last 25 years. That is the truly scary thing. It is the exponential growth of our waste production that is totally out of control. The web launched in 1999. One of the things, as I wrote my last book, Worldwide Waste, is I discovered that technology is the hidden accelerant of the climate crisis. The web, launched in 1989, since then the computer sector has exploded like no other sector in history. So it's a rich problem. The total CO2 caused by humans, 10% is caused by the poorest 50. The next 40% and 50% of the CO2 is caused by the richest. And unfortunately, the highest per capita rates of e-waste production are in the Scandinavian countries. The highest lifestyles, the countries that I admired an awful lot. It is the rich world, it is the global north that is the core driver of the climate crisis. And of course, the global south that is suffering most from it at the moment. Our waste. Most of what we do is waste. We create stuff to throw it away at an extraordinary pace. We're not even creating value. We're not even creating value today. We're just creating models of waste production. Most economies are economies of creating waste. 54 million tons of e-waste is being created every year, electronics waste. 40 million tons is the total weight of all commercial aircrafts ever built. This is like dumping 1,000 laptops every second. Dumping 1,000 laptops every second, and it's doubling every 15 years. And the vast majority of this is not recycled, much less than 20%. In fact, there's a global, quote unquote, informal recycling economy in which there's estimated to be about 18 million children and 13 million women involved in being poisoned. This is what e-waste recycling looks like as they burn the material off the cables, the plastic off the cables, to get at the copper or the other metals in the actual waste. They're using children as young as 5 years old to disassemble e-waste, because e-waste is designed, our electronics are designed in a way that they cannot be easily disassembled. The big tech industry creates products that cannot be fixed and cannot be recycled, and they do that deliberately in the pursuit of short-term profit. A vintage car from the 1980s, the 1970s, 1950s, 1930s, you'd think, yeah, 1940s. There's an actual vintage car. Well, what's a vintage computer? This is a vintage MacBook. They made an announcement a couple of months ago that the 12-inch MacBook from 2015 is now a vintage product. From 2015, it's a vintage product. What sort of crazy world do we live in technology? This is why we have such a massive waste and massive e-waste and massive problems in the climate crisis. The tremendous acceleration of production that has occurred. A typical smartphone will create about 5 kg of pollution a year for use. So that's, it's not insignificant when you consider the amount of smartphones that are used. This is basically recharging batteries, but 60 kg to manufacture. So the most of the damage is done in technology, in the actual device. It's not in the use of the device, it's the actual making of the device, and then of course the dumping of the device. Most of the devices that we use in rich countries like Ireland or France or Belgium or Norway end up being put in container ships and sent to Ghana or Pakistan for those 18 million children and 13 million women to disassemble in the process. And most of that is done illegally, but of course we turn a blind eye because we don't want the problem on our doorsteps. 90 kgs of stones, gravels, and tailings and slag to make a smartphone. How many smartphones? Right, 122 million in 2007. Then going to an average of 1.5 billion by 2021. So since 2007, we have made 15 billion smartphones. So at 60 kgs of CO2, just to manufacture them, that's about 900 million tons of CO2, just in relation to the manufacture of our smartphones. The life of our machines. As we get cleverer, the life of our machines, gets shorter. Humans are intelligent, but we are certainly not wise. And we have certainly not created economy anywhere approaching wisdom that we have today. So the optimal vacuum cleaner should last for about 11 years, but it's currently lasting about 6.5 years. In 2011, a washing machine should have lasted for 17 years. It was lasting for 10 years in the process. At 2021, it's lasting for 6.3 years. So all our products, their lives are declining. Their useful lives are declining. All the products that we are creating. Laptops should last 20 years. They're lasting at best 4.5 years in most situations. This is a core essence of the problem. We have got to start creating things that last, or else the planet won't last. The planet cannot sustain this sort of economy, the planned obsolescence economy. Carbon footprint. So what can we do? So this Green Alliance estimated the total cost, including the usage for a year, about 72 kgs for a smartphone. But as we keep the smartphones for a longer period, we can see significant declines. We are spreading that CO2 across years of use. The perfect storm is where you've got high intensity in the manufacture of energy, right? And you've got basically a very short life cycle and practically no recycling. That is the perfect storm of waste. So here is something. If you keep on average a phone for 3 years, and over 60 years of a typical lifespan of people using phones, that's 20 devices. If we kept our phones for 4 years, that would be 15 devices. That would be a reduction of 5 devices. If we kept our devices for an average of 5 years, we'd only need 12 devices. Hold on to our devices, get them repaired. If millions of us could do that, it would have a huge impact on the resource intensity and the climate crisis. What is feeding all these devices? It's the explosion in data growth. It's the stuff we're storing on them. 1.4 trillion photos were taken last year. 1.4 trillion. More photos were taken last year than were taken in the entire 20th century, right? So we're into zettabytes. If you were to print out 1 zettabyte of data, you would need 20 trillion trees. So there are only 3.5 trillion trees on the planet. That's to give you an idea of how big a zettabyte of data is. By 2035, it's estimated we'll have over 2,000 zettabytes of data. This is not sustainable, by the way. In any remote planet, this is not sustainable. To store 2,000 zettabytes of data based on current storage pricing would cost us $60 trillion. $60 trillion. The entire global economy is worth about $90 trillion. 28% annual growth rate. But you know what's the real kicker in this? 90% of it is crap. 90% of the data that we store, we never use 3 months after we store it. How many of those 1.4 trillion photos are going to be used? You know, very, very few. We are a crap producing society. That's what we do in tech. Most data centers are very elaborate, very expensive data fields, dumps, crap, places where we store crap, and you get charged an awful lot of money for storing crap. So let's stop creating crap and let's stop storing crap. That would be a great model. We would be doing something very positive. Not expecting you to understand this, is too busy, but just the basic idea, right, in this. 1,000-word piece of content. I've done a lot of analysis about how much CO2 is caused by creating content. So a 1,000-word piece of content, 20 hours to ideate, write, edit, sign off, etc. It's written on a laptop. The document weighs about 5 megabytes because there's pictures in it, etc. And it's read once. And the read time is 4 minutes. So I looked at the creation process, looked at the distribution process of the content, the time to read it and to store that piece of content. As you can see here, the vast majority of CO2 is in the creation if it's only read once, right? So 20 hours, how much using the laptop? Remember, a laptop, about 300 kg of CO2 to manufacture. So basically, to create a 1,000-word piece of content could be responsible for about 2 kgs of CO2. We need to start thinking about the impact of what we do, because digital is not invisible. The cloud is on the ground, right? Most of the actual waste in digital and the web occurs in the use of the environment. This is Mozilla, the creators of Firefox. They did a detailed analysis of their CO2 impact, looked at everything from their developers to their lighting and heating to their coffee machines, etc. 2% was within their world. 98% was in the people using the Mozilla browser, the Firefox actual browser. So my previous model here is one person using, one person reading this. If we have, let's say, 10,000 people reading this, so the exact same piece of content, and we move to 10,000 people using it, we go to 96% of the waste is occurring in the actual reading process, or the kg of CO2. And as Olivia said, this could be positive. It could be negative that we created 2 kg of CO2 for only one person to read. Why? That seems like a huge waste. If the 10,000 people read this and use this in a positive way and actually do something where they save energy in the process, then it's good. But getting a model where we start thinking about the impacts of, our carbon footprint throughout digital, I think is a very important thing we need to start working on. Websites. Most of my career is in building and managing websites, and websites have gone crazy in the process. Until 2000, 17 million or something. Then, like everything, it just explodes. 1.7 or so billion websites. One website for every 3 people on the planet, right? 91% of content gets no traffic from Google. And let me tell you, if you're not getting found from Google, you don't exist. So why are we creating all this stuff that nobody is using? So we've these engines, not of creativity, we've got these engines of waste production. We produce waste, we don't produce content. We produce waste at a phenomenal level. Web page size, back in 2005, about 0.4 of a megabyte, then up to 0.7, 2015, 2024 megabytes for an average web page size. Let me tell you something. There is no way you need 4 megabytes to design a web page. You should easily be able to design a web page with a megabyte or less. Often 100 kilobytes is more than enough to design a really good web page. This 4 megabytes reflects at least 95% waste. And what's happening for a lot of people? A lot of people with average phones on mobile, the length of time it's taking to download these websites is absolutely growing. At the average now is about 27 seconds in the process because of website bloat. JavaScript, growing by 600%. Most websites don't even need JavaScript. We just add JavaScript for vanity in the process. Custom fonts growing by 850%. Everything is growing. Most environments don't need custom fonts, or they certainly don't need the multiplicity of fonts that they're actually using. So there's so much really poor design occurring, certainly in the area that I work in. Most developers just don't care. Most designers just don't care. We don't care how big the website is. We don't care how much waste we create. It's easier for us to create a big, heavy, wasteful website because we can use frameworks. It's more convenient for ourselves. And that's how, as a global population, we have got ourselves into these problems. An analog call, an old analog call on that, you know, thing that is ancient now in the museums, right? But from an environmental point of view, an old analog call that took an hour, right, created about 3.6 megabyte of data. The same analog call using Zoom or Teams or whatever is 27 megabytes. So that's progress, right? That's efficiency. Oh, we're getting better. We are 8 times, you know, more inefficient making an audio call over VoIP than we were over analog. But we're told it's progress. But if you go to standard video, and I know here, and of course it is much less than me flying to Belgium, vastly much less, right? Standard video, 270 megabytes, HD 540. If you go to 8K, it can be 36 gigabytes of data. And nobody can say 8K anyway, but you can boast to your friends that you've got an 8K phone or an 8K whatever in the process. So I'm not saying let's not do video conferencing, let's not, etc. But if you could make an old analog call, if you can do audio instead of video, it's better. You know, I try in my meetings now just to turn on the screen for the first 2 or 3 minutes and then go to audio in the process. You'd be saving 90% data if you actually did that. So take action. What can we do? So here's some principles. Identify true cost and value. Embrace degrowth. I know it's unfashionable. Make digital waste visible. How do we visualize this problem? Because people don't see digital as an issue. They don't see the carbon footprint of digital. So we look at, you know, what is the cost and value to ourselves? What's the cost and value to the organization? What's the cost and value to humans in general? What's the cost and value to animals, insects, and plants? You know, those things that we might want our children and their children to be able to see in the future that are dying out at phenomenal rates because of our activities. And then the overall impact on the earth. I call it the earth experience. I used to work in user experience. I used to work in customer experience. Now I want to work in earth experience. We design something that has got to work for the earth. Cost to make it, cost to use it, to reuse it, cost to maintain it. Some wonderful stuff happening with the right to repair happening around the world at the moment. Some really good momentum. And the end of life cost. I was talking to a repairer that said if an electronics manufacturer designed it properly, this could be disassembled in 3 minutes. But it's now taking 30 minutes because they don't want it disassembled. They've designed it deliberately from a waste point of view because waste equals profit. Waste equals short-term profit and long-term loss. Embrace degrowth. Consume less, enjoy more. We're buying 5 times the clothes we were buying 20 years ago, and we're wearing them half as long. We could have a great life with technology by using more of the things that we have and buying much less. Consume less, enjoy more. Create less waste. Focus on the waste. If we can pull the 90% of crap data, and that's bringing back editors who say, no, we're not going to create this page. No, we're not going to create this app. Why do we need an app? You know, most apps are vanity projects in websites. Data, we organize the data. Most organizations, their data is out of control because they've got a crap universe, you know, so they can't control it. We reuse, we share, we archive, and we delete 90%. Let's start deleting the old emails, delete from 2018 onwards. There's so much we can do here. Maintain our devices, hold on to long life, repair them. And visualize. The thing that I'm working on at the moment is a visual entity of connecting digital with trees. Right? So an average tree can absorb about 10 kg of CO2 per year. And let's imagine an average tree has 10,000 leaves. Trees have Huge variance in leaves, but let's say an average tree has 10,000 leaves. So 1 leaf is equal 1 gram of CO2. Just for, understand, it's somewhere in this territory, somewhere roughly in this territory. If you send an HTML email, that's about 6 grams of CO2 in total. So 6 leaves have to work for that HTML email, have to absorb the CO2 that HTML email caused. If instead you send a text email, it's only 2 grams. A text email is much less energy intensive than a HTML email. If you send an SMS, that is 100 times less intensive in the process. And if you send no email at all, that's even better. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Gerry. I see all the reactions. I see great. Questions are popping up. That's good. We've got 15 minutes left. Thank you for giving us the time for the questions. It's going too quick now. Upcycling for clothes and many other goods is part of the response. So yeah, in IT as well, as I guess. I don't know if you see the chat because it's flowing too fast for me. I'll already thank Danny for one of the comments he made in the chat. He said most industries make efforts to reduce CO2, but on the other end, ICT does not do its part. So that's why our institute is so important. So thank you for that. Rich mentioned that it was very sobering to listen to your talk, but so important to make these trends transparent for all of us to see. Veronique mentioned, I get what you say about waste due to people putting things online in the hope that someone will be interested in what they did. But she says, do not say, please, if Google does not know you don't exist, because that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. How would you react to Veronique's comment?
Well, I think, there is, I've hundreds and thousands of conversations over the years of somebody might be interested in this, somebody might be interested, and it could, etc. And it could, but it's like playing the lotto, and I think we need to bring back editing much more, the decision of quality, what we should do, what we should not do. Because if this idea that digital says is do it and then see what happens, well, doing it costs energy. And a lot of energy. And then, and you know what? When we do it and we see what happens and nothing happens, we don't even take it down. So it stays up there being stored and sucking energy, something that never worked. There's so more thinking. So when with the pandemic, I saw a study that analyzed 400 to 500 AI systems to diagnose COVID-19. Not one of them worked. Not one of them worked. Most of them were actually damaging. And 95% of them could have been stopped straight away and says, listen, let's not even go on planning. This isn't going to work. But the desire to get something out there, to make a press release, to have an app, to say you've done this, to say you've done that, etc. And this happens everywhere in everything. Digital gives us this seemingly incredibly easy way to create stuff. We're all creators. There's a book inside all of us, and the web let the book out.
Okay. Thank you. Trace is asking in the chat your views on 5G.
Yeah, I think 5G is essentially a con. We don't need it. We don't need. And let me tell you, if you're thinking we need it for all these automated cars that are going to be driving around, think of the gigabytes of data that those automatic cars are going to be throwing off in the process. Don't need it. A surgery needs it, a factory needs it. There's specialist areas where you're sending major CAD drawings to design an engine or something like that, or doing specialist surgery. Yeah, you need it. The vast majority of people don't need it. It's like 4K screens or 8K screens. It's a con. To sell us more stuff that we don't need. So we pull out old stuff that actually is working great you know, so that somebody can build a bigger yacht for themselves. And,
Bigger yacht,
you know,
indeed. As you mentioned, there are probably very good usage of 5G for some specific industrial needs. For example, we could even question the need for surgery, for example, at least in most of our countries where hospitals are connected by fiber. So I would by far prefer to have a surgeon with a fiber than a 5G.
exactly. If you've been operated on, Olivia, better a wire than the air, than it going through the air. You know, that's an excellent point. Actually, I hadn't even thought about that yet.
But yeah, apart from that, if it's as you mentioned, to watch cats of videos in 8K, what's the point? That's mentioned by Veronique. Totally agree about what you mentioned. That's not a question. She was pointing to superpower we give Google by the way we let them be the web superpower. Okay.
Yeah, no, but it's true. I mean, and even what I noticed in my own behavior, like I've stopped using Google, but I still use a lot of search engine. There's the Ecosia and DuckDuckGo, although I saw a study just recently that says DuckDuckGo was very energy intensive in its search behaviors. But what I find myself doing is, you know, I occasionally have to post things, and I always go to the search to find the postage rate, but I should either remember it or write it down, you know, and I find myself doing tons of searches, whether I should remember them or I should have, or I need them so often I should have written it down somewhere. So we've created this addiction to search where I think half of my searches are unnecessary, or I don't think enough to frame the search properly. I just quickly put in a word and then I say, oh, no, and then I add another word on. And if I thought for another 10 seconds, I could have framed the search better. You know, every search creates a tiny bit of CO2.
Yeah, and there's also kind of an addiction to it, and dependency.
Yeah.
Not only addiction, but dependency. Because, for example, I was thinking about myself driving to a conference yesterday. I know exactly the way that I'm taking because it's the same every day of the week. But just to know at what time I will arrive and be convinced that I will not be late, etc., I still start my Google Maps just to have an idea of my arrival time, which actually makes no difference because anyway, if I'm late, I'm late. That's the kind of things where you completely get used to using data, while in the past we would use our brains to know the way and read a map.
Well, yeah, well, I mean, these things exactly happened. I remember when we were in Lisbon and on the trams, and I was looking down at the thing, it's getting closer, and then, you know, there was a huge monument which we passed by, which we would have known had I not been looking down. So the data froze and I missed the monument. And then I looked, oh, we should have got off at the last stop. I'd have seen it had I not been looking at the bloody computer in the Pro. And I did exactly what you did in the car. I used to put it on, it just felt good. Oh, it's another blah in the Pro. So now I've just started the habits. No, I don't. Or I use it at the beginning of a journey, then I turn it off, then I'll use it near the end of the journey. And these are cultural habits because digital has taught us to be wasteful. And then there's these waste transfer much beyond digital as well.
There's a comment from Pedro. He mentioned that we can use a regular GPS instead, of course, but then you need to buy an additional GPS or something like that. So then comes the question of the equipment and not only of the data. So that's an interesting question indeed. Should we use data or not for these kind of things? One other question that I saw in the chat was, how do you reconcile reducing waste and experimenting as a way of innovation?
Yeah, well, I think we really need to look at the models of experimentation with minimum waste. You know, how do we bring the frame of the Earth experience and bring into, you know, prototyping and modeling, etc., you know, that we can do the most learning with the minimal energy. and minimal waste. So I think if we start thinking that way, we can come up with better ways. It's not saying no experiment, but most innovation is crap innovation. And most for 5G or 4K, it's not designed for really useful purposes. It's designed to extract more money. We're extracting resources and money out of people in clever ways. So most of our innovation is not even useful in the process. So absolutely we need and often the best experimentation is in multidisciplinary collaboration. So bringing together multidisciplinary teams, getting humans to do the work rather than tools to do the work. I think we have so much untapped human, and every hour we produce, or every day we produce about 1 kg of CO2. We should use it. Like our brain is responsible for energy consumption and thus CO2 production, right, in the process. So if our brain is not working, it's still consuming that. If our brain isn't doing the remembering, it's still consuming and creating the CO2. So if we got our brain to remember, our brain would be paying for itself. We got to use our bodies more, use our legs more, cycle more, use all this energy which we're not using, which of course when we don't use it makes us sick because we become fat and unhealthy in the process. So us getting, like in Ireland in 1960, 80% of children walked or cycled to school. In Ireland today, 20% of children walk or cycle to school. That's just insane. And it's a danger to walk to school in Ireland today because of mega SUVs and these monster trucks that are being driven as pretending to be cars in the process, and all the other increase in traffic. There's so much we could do if we actually use our bodies more, and it would be good for us, it would be good for the planet in the process.
Indeed, yeah. There's the technological slaves that we are using, and all the energy that if we wanted to do things with our body, we would simply be incapable of doing it because we are consuming so much energy. And about taking the train, I'm saying hello to one person in the audience. He's the president of the board of the national trains in Belgium, and I know that he travels by bicycle and train as much as he can. So that's a hello from me on that side. One of the comments was that getting aware of our habit is indeed probably the best part of finding solutions to our bad environmental habits. Gerry, there was a question in the chat. You shared the digital waste analysis for 1,000 word document. Is that model published or available for use in other situations?
Yeah, if somebody gets it, it's still a work in progress. I haven't published it officially, but I'll send anyone the detailed spreadsheets and stuff. If they send me an email to Gerry@gerrymcgovern.com, you'll find me on the web as well. I'd love feedback on it. I'm trying to build it. I've been working on it the last couple of years. So it's not officially published at the moment, but I'd be delighted to send anybody, and I can make it I can send it on to you, Olivia, after, if people, and it can be available as a link to download the spreadsheet if anyone wants to look at it.
Okay, thank you. And there's a plus in the messages. I don't know if any person in the audience still has any question. We are just 1 or 2 minutes ahead on timing, so that's perfect. Hello, Thibault. No other questions? Otherwise, we are early for the break, which is a good thing. Small personal cars have small unseen impact. What's missing is the quantitization and visibility of our usage impact. For now, few tools are existing for web development, web browser usage, but not for connected objects. Indeed, connected objects, IoT, is one of the key issues in trying to measure that because it's exploding at the moment. Very difficult to assess what's the impact of that. And it makes me think about something else related, because we talked about research. Yesterday evening, I was talking to a professor at university. They have supercalculators, of course, to simulate stuff. And he was telling me that the researchers sometimes are launching calculations that are so big that the potential gain of whatever they get as a environmental gain is completely unbalanced with the quantity of energy that they used. And I guess that we are going in the same direction with IoT, where we are creating vast amounts of sensors, etc., that potentially will never bring the gains as much as we.
Well, exactly. I think these are major decisions. There is a cultural belief within technology that all data is potentially good data, and that any opportunity to create data and store data should be taken in the process, and then we'll analyze it later. We'll find a use for it later. So there's a collect now, analyze later in the process. And we know the amount of energy intensity created in relation to training the AI models. So there's a lot of, as this professor indicated, this is happening all over the place, that the energy at the creative process is vastly outweighing any gains in later in the life, and that much of this stuff is actually never used, 90% of it. So, and that's 100% waste. So even the stuff that's used, how well is it used? But if we could really start thinking more about, do we really need to do this calculation? Or do we need to be, what's the point in calculating pi to 10 million pints? Like, how much energy was used in that? And can we still get the same result by using an 8-bit computer that gets us an approximate measure? Will that still do the job? Or are we doing this for ego and vanity and to show off to other scientists that, we got a bigger calculation than you have?
Yeah, for sure. That brings me to the end of the discussion today, but also with an excellent link with what we will be listening to just after. Thank you very much, Gerry. The link is actually that just after the break, we'll hear Simon Oeutedal talk about eco-design and as a way to reduce data. For the web, it's of course a potential that starts to be well known, but it's really something that you can do in all technical choices that we make, and start it as a eco-design as a basis for business model for a company. There was also a question about the role of a CTO to help us move organizations towards more sustainable IT. That will be in the debates that we have this afternoon. So I let you wait for the next talks that we'll have today. Thank you again very, very much, Gerry.
Thank you.
We'll have a break now until 11:30. You can use the time for networking in the lounge if you are in Airmeet, and if you are on YouTube. Don't forget that we will restart a second live broadcasting just after the break, so just refresh your page. And sorry for the quantity of data that we are transmitting to YouTube. That's the only way for us to also copy the information for our fellow students from the doctoral school at university. Thank you.
Thank you.